Welcome to the realm of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Enjoy listening. Robert Benoit had lived a disciplined life for years as a senior military commander on Earth. However, his latest mission would prove to be the most challenging test of his career. The Earth government had devised a covert operation to dethrone Commander Hanu, the increasingly authoritarian leader of a space colony. Hanu had begun exploiting the colony's resources for his own gain, establishing a repressive regime over its people. Benoit was chosen for this task due to his strategic brilliance and ability to operate discreetly. The orders from Earth were clear. He would be sent to the colony, assigned a wooden house to stay in, and given 1 week to execute a plan to overthrow Hanu. Failure was not an option. When Benoit left Earth and arrived at the space colony, the simple yet sturdy structure of the wooden house assigned to him caught his attention. Outside, a constant light rain created a rhythmic tapping sound on the roof. The house was located in the colony's outskirts, far from Hanu's grandiose headquarters, which made it easier for Benoit to maintain his secrecy. He spent his first few days studying the colony's internal structure and identifying Hanu's vulnerabilities. By day, he mingled with the colony's residents, gathering information. By night, he worked on maps under the dim light of his house. Hanu's security was tight, but Benoit needed to find a chink in the leader's armor. On the evening of the third day, a strange tapping sound mingled with the noise of the rain. At first, Benoit thought it was the wind hitting the wooden walls, but the sound grew more distinct. He approached the door, his hand on his weapon, and cautiously opened it, the hinges creaking. Standing before him was a drenched girl with purple hair and elf-like ears. She held a metal cup in her trembling hands, her eyes swollen from crying, looking at Benoit with a desperate expression. Raindrops streamed down her face as she whispered, "Can you let me in, please?" Benoit stepped back in surprise and invited the girl inside. She sat by the stove, shivering as she tried to warm herself. She introduced herself as Lyra. Her speech was halting, coming in fits and starts. My mom is being held in Hanu's headquarters," she finally said. "I have to help her, but I can't do it alone." Benoit's mind raced. Could this girl's story derail his plans? Yet a soldier's compassion prevailed, and he decided to help Lyra. Benoit brought Lyra a blanket after settling her by the stove. Her trembling slowly subsided, but the fear and desperation in her eyes remained evident. Her voice shook as she spoke of her mother. "Her name is Vanna," she said. "Hanu is holding her in his headquarters. My mom is a botanist. She managed the colony's plant life and oxygen production for years. But Hanu started using her knowledge for his own purposes. He locked her in a room, and I haven't seen her in a month." As Benoit listened carefully to Lyra's words, something stirred within him. He had been a cold, calculated soldier for years, but this girl's innocence and love for her mother awakened an emotional side he had long suppressed. "I understand, Lyra," he said softly. "We'll find you, Mom, but we need to be careful. Hanu's headquarters is a dangerous place." Lyra nodded gratefully and whispered, "Thank you." That night, Benoit and Lyra began devising a plan to rescue Vanna. Benoit decided to temporarily set aside his mission to overthrow Hanu and focus on saving Lyra's mother first. However, he realized he needed to better understand the headquarters' security systems. Lyra recalled some notes from her mother's botanical work, which hinted at a possible secret entrance to the headquarters. Using Lyra's information, Benoit started drawing a map. As the hours passed, a bond began to form between these two people from vastly different worlds. Benoit was impressed by Lyra's courage, while Lyra drew strength from Benoit's determination. On the morning of the fourth day, Benoit left Lyra at the house and went to the colony's market area. There, he met an old botanist who knew Vanna. The man confirmed that Vanna was being held in a greenhouse at Hanu's headquarters. Vanna could talk to plants, the old man said sadly. But Hanu is using her knowledge for synthetic oxygen production. It's impossible for her to escape that greenhouse. Benoit took note of this information and returned to the house to share it with Lyra. However, The hope in Lyra's eyes quickly turned to fear again. I don't know how much longer my mom can survive in that greenhouse, she said. She loves nature, but being locked up in a confined space is slowly killing her. Benoit placed a reassuring hand on Lyra's shoulder. I promise we'll get Vanna out of there, he said. This small gesture created an unexpected warmth between them. Benoit hadn't felt such closeness in years. His military life had forced him to suppress his emotions. Lyra, on the other hand, felt safe seeing the determination in Benoit's eyes. On the 5th day, Benoit and Lyra developed a plan to infiltrate the headquarters. During this process, Benoit's thoughts kept drifting to Vanna. He hadn't met her yet, but the loving words Lyra used to describe her mother painted a vivid picture in his mind. Vanna must be a strong yet gentle woman, deeply connected to nature. Benoit found himself inexplicably drawn to her through these thoughts. That evening, as they sat by the stove, he said to Lyra, I really want to meet your mom. Lyra smiled. She'll love you. My mom has always admired brave people. On the night of the 6th day, Benoit and Lyra set out to infiltrate the headquarters. The rain continued to fall, aiding their concealment. The secret entrance Lyra remembered was a tunnel beneath the greenhouse. When they reached the tunnel, Benoit went ahead to scout the path. They finally arrived at the greenhouse, where a woman stood behind a glass partition, working among the plants. Vanna, her long, wavy purple hair and elf-like ears bore a striking resemblance to Lyra, but her eyes carried the weariness and wisdom of years. Vanna was tending to the plants when she heard the door open and looked up. Her eyes filled with tears upon seeing Lyra, but she paused when she noticed Benoit. Who are you? Vanna asked, her voice tinged with both surprise and the cautious curiosity one might feel in the presence of a soldier. Benoit replied, I'm Robert Benoit. Your daughter, Lyra, brought me here. We've come to rescue you. Vanna looked into Benoit's eyes for a moment, and in that instant, an indescribable attraction sparked between them. The depth in Vanna's eyes made Benoit's heart race. For the first time in years, he felt a sensation he hadn't experienced, a spark spreading within him. But their time was limited. Benoit broke the glass partition and helped Vanna out. As Vanna hugged her daughter, she cast a grateful glance at Benoit. During their escape, Henu's guards noticed the alarm and gave chase. Benoit used all his skills to protect Vanna and Lyra. Running through the rain, he took Vanna's hand and said, Trust me, I'll get you out of here. Vanna squeezed his hand tightly and whispered, I trust you. This moment cemented the bond forming between them. When they returned to the wooden house, all three were soaked but safe. As Vanna warmed herself by the stove, she turned to Benoit and asked, Why did you help us? Benoit paused for a moment before answering honestly. At first, it was just for Lyra's desperation, but then, as I got to know you, I wanted to fight for you too. Vanna's cheeks flushed slightly. For years, she had opened her heart to nothing but science and nature, but Benoit's sincerity touched her. On the final day, Benoit, Vanna, and Lyra decided to devise a plan to overthrow Henu. Vanna had discovered a code during her time in the greenhouse that could disable the headquarters' entire defense system. During the operation, Benoit and Vanna worked side by side. With every move, their trust and attraction for each other became more apparent. When Hanu's system collapsed, the leader was forced to surrender, and the colony's people reclaimed their freedom. After the operation, Benoit, Vanna, and Lyra stood in front of the wooden house. The rain had stopped and the sky had cleared. Vanna turned to Benoit and asked, Will you stay with us? Benoit thought for a moment. He was supposed to return to Earth, but his heart now beat for Vanna and Lyra. I'd like to stay here for a while longer, he said with a smile. Vanna took his hand and said, Then let's start anew together. As Benoit held Vanna's hand, he looked up at the sky. The stars in the colony's artificial atmosphere weren't as bright as those on Earth, but they were somehow soothing. Hanu's downfall had opened the door to a new era for the colony, but it was also a turning point for Benoit. Despite being a soldier who was expected to return to Earth, a growing feeling inside him told him he belonged here with Vanna and Lyra. He had said, I'd like to stay here for a while longer, but deep in his heart, he knew he wanted that while to last forever. The colony's people poured into the streets, celebrating their liberation from Hanu's oppressive regime. Benoit, Vanna, and Lyra watched the crowd's joy from a distance as they stood in front of the wooden house. However, this victory also brought new responsibilities. The colony had fallen into disarray under Hanu's authoritarian rule. Resources had been misused, and the people's basic needs had been neglected. Vanna decided to use her expertise in botany to revitalize the colony's ecosystem. "Plants are the breath of this colony," she said one morning at the breakfast table. "If we can make them healthy again, the people will find hope too." Benoit watched Vanna's determination with admiration. Her love for nature and her connection with plants were unlike anything he had ever witnessed. While working in the greenhouses, Vanna would touch the leaves of the plants, speaking to them as if in a whisper. One day, Benoit said to her, "The way you talk to the plants, it's truly incredible." Vanna smiled and replied, "They listen to us too. Robert, you just need to know how to hear them." This moment deepened Benoit's admiration for Vanna. Her wisdom, grace, and connection with nature brought out emotions in Benoit that his military life had long suppressed. Lyra, meanwhile, noticed the growing closeness between her mother and Benoit and was happy about it. "My mom hasn't smiled like this in a long time," she said to Benoit one evening. "It's because of you, Robert." Benoit was touched by Lyra's words. Throughout his military career, he had stayed distant from family and avoided emotional connections. But now, this small family had become more important to him than anything else. Benoit began establishing a defense system to secure the colony. Hanu's downfall had left the colony vulnerable to external threats. Using his military experience, Benoit trained a group of young colonists and formed a defense team. In the process, he also found more opportunities to spend time with Vanna. While working together in the greenhouses, Vanna started teaching him the secrets of the plants. "Look, this plant is very effective in oxygen production," she would say, gently caressing a leaf. Benoit, however, was more focused on Vanna's sparkling eyes than the plants. "Being here with you, it's so different from my military life," he said one day. Vanna smiled and replied, "Maybe you don't need to be a soldier anymore." Those words had a profound impact on Benoit. The idea of returning to Earth seemed more distant with each passing day. However, one evening, he received a message from Earth. The government demanded that Benoit report the results of the operation and return immediately. The message was cold and commanding. "Mission accomplished. Return to Earth at once." Benoit felt his heart tighten as he read the message. The time he had spent with Vanna and Lyra had given him a new life. But his military oath was calling him back to Earth. That night, Benoit couldn't sleep. He gazed out of the wooden house's small window at the colony's artificial sky. Vanna noticed his restlessness and came to his side. "Is something wrong, Robert?" she asked softly. Benoit showed her the message and said, "I have to go back," but there was hesitation in his voice. Vanna was silent for a moment, then placed her hand on his. "We built a life here, Robert. Lyra and I. We love you. But if you need to go, I won't hold you back. Just know this. You'll always have a home here." Vanna's words intensified the conflict within Benoit. That night, as Vanna rested her head on his shoulder, he breathed in her scent. "I don't want to leave you," he whispered. Vanna, her eyes welling up, said, "Then don't." This moment clarified everything for Benoit. Returning to Earth would mean going back to his old life, loneliness, cold orders, and endless missions. But here, with Vanna and Lyra, he had found a true home. Benoit sent a brief message to Earth. "Mission accomplished. I'm staying in the colony. Cut off communication." This message officially ended his military career. Though the Earth government was furious with his decision, Benoit was now free. He began building a new life in the colony with Vanna. Together, they completely revitalized the colony's ecosystem. The greenhouses increased oxygen production, and the people began living in a healthy environment once more. As Lyra grew, she drew strength from her mother and Benoit's love. She decided to become a botanist, following in Vanna's footsteps. Benoit, meanwhile, set aside his military skills, and continued teaching the colony's children defense techniques. But his greatest joy came from sitting with Vanna in front of the wooden house each evening, watching the colony's artificial sky. You know, Vanna said one evening, "When you came here, you didn't just save Lyra and me. You saved my heart, too." Benoit kissed her hand and whispered, "And you saved mine." Over time, Benoit and Vanna's love became a legend in the colony. The people spoke of their courage and devotion. Hanu's downfall marked not only the end of a leader, but also the rebirth of a family and a community. Benoit, once a cold and calculated soldier, had become a loving husband and a father figure to Lyra. The space colony was his new home, and Vanna was the meaning of his life. Though the raindrops still tapped rhythmically on the wooden house's roof, the sound was no longer a source of fear for Benoit. It had become the melody of peace and love.